This video is brought to you by PrizePicks. Welcome to Hot Takes, the show where I go through the comment section and interact with the comments that you guys have had throughout the week. Got a ton of questions and thoughts for you guys to filter through. First one's from Steve, who says, getting rid of the ball quick doesn't mean you're a fast processor. I think people get it confused. I think there's a lot of nuance to that conversation, right? Because there is the perception of, oh, somebody gets rid of the ball quickly, they're just throwing checkdowns and screens. Now, the real question isn't if they're throwing checkdowns and screens and that's why they're getting the ball rid of the ball quickly and have a low time to throw. It's the question of, like, based on what the defense is doing, is a checkdown or a screen the right decision, right? Because it could just be a result of good pre-snap process where you're looking at what they give you and then you have to throw the ball quickly. There's also like what Tua does. Tua was known to be a strong processor at Alabama. When he got to the Dolphins, he excelled in like 2023 by being a quick processor, but he still wasn't throwing the ball downfield a ton, right? Like, he was making quick decisions based on what he's seeing pre and post snaps, getting quick pictures, and then making good decisions there. It's really about the quality of the decision on top of the speed that decision is being made. I don't think it's a question of like, oh, if you're it's not like a 40 time where fastest is best, right? I think it's a range that you want to sit in, right? You want to be able to get rid of the ball, with variance on how you play, on average, somewhere between 2.7 seconds and 3 seconds. You don't want to be above 3 seconds because that puts the ball in danger unless you are a rare athlete, right? Like, Cam Newton in his prime, Lamar Jackson in his prime, that level athlete, Mike Vick, stuff like that. Russ Wilson in his prime, like stuff like that. So no, not necessarily just because you get rid of the ball quickly doesn't mean you're a fast processor. And like, if you have too low of a time to throw, let's say your time to throw is like 2.3, that indicates that you're just checking the ball. Right, you're immediately conceding to checking the ball, right? So you don't want it too low. You also don't want it too high. You want it to sit between 2.7 and 3. You want it, basically, it should feel in rhythm, right? There's a certain rhythm to playing quarterback, and you can tell when guys hold the ball long because usually you're yelling at your television for the guy to get rid of the ball or throw it or slide or run or do something, because you can feel the natural rhythm of the play, right, based on the drop and what they're trying to do. That's another thing, right? Plays give you clues on what is expected of a quarterback. One of the clues that you get is your drop. Right? If you have a 7-step drop, you're trying to time that drop with something deep down the field. If you have a 5-step drop, that means you're trying to more than likely time it with something quick. If you have a 0 drop or a 3-step drop, you're probably hitting something quick, not downfield, just quick, or maybe it's like a one-hitter, quick read, get rid of the ball, RPO stop, right? Now, getting back to Steve's statement here, I do think in general, if you are getting rid of the ball within 2.7 in 3 seconds and your success rate is not terrible, right, then that indicates somebody who's probably a strong passer, a quick processor. If you are outside of that and you don't have a strong success rate, then it indicates the opposite of it, right? There are guys who hold on to the ball and hover closer to 3 seconds. Joe Burrow is a guy who hovers closer to 3 seconds, sometimes a little over 3 seconds. And of course, Joe Burrow is a fine and fast processor, right? There are times where quarterbacks will hold the ball a little bit longer. And when those times happen, you'll see you should see the clues in stuff like their drop, the route depth, how the protection looks, and all of that. Basically, you can't use one stat to determine how good a quarterback is, right? Time to throw is a piece to a large puzzle that is quarterback play. And for the Browns specifically, it's a problem for Shador. It's a problem for Deshaun Watson. It's not really a problem for Dylan Gabriel, but Dylan Gabriel has bigger problems than time to throw, right? His ability to throw downfield is a problem, which is more limiting than being a slow processor for a quarterback. So when it comes to the Brown situation, I get not wanting to hype it up too much, but you do want to see these guys in a specific range. And I think that's fair to ask of these quarterbacks to be in a specific range when it comes to time to throw. Edward Bartell with the next question says, hype masters like Kiper and Bayless are the reason why it was so shocking that Sanders fell in the draft. In hindsight, he actually fell to an appropriate level for his skill and talent as shown by the tape. That's Good Sport put together a solid discussion on what happened throughout the year with Sanders. I don't think he should have fell to 155. My opinion before the draft was that Shedeur was a second-round pick. He might slide into the first round because he's a quarterback, but he's a second-round pick. I thought the idea of Shedeur that, like, some people in the media were floating, and the media usually floats ridiculous shit around quarterbacks every draft, right? Every draft, they're like, oh, this quarterback's going to go in the top 2, right? And, like, it never ends up being that case. Like, there's always a quarterback that they push into a top 5 pick conversation. It's not going to be a top 5 pick. But with Shedeur, that's all people putting him at 2. I didn't think he would be pick 2 or anywhere close to the top 5. And that wasn't an opinion I had on the island, by the way. I thought that there was a lot of people felt like Shedeur was a second-round pick who might slide into the first round. So I do disagree with the notion that, like, Shedeur fell to the appropriate place, because I don't think the appropriate place for him to be drafted based on what was on tape, at least. You know, there's a conversation to be had about how the meetings went, how the workouts went. Clearly, something didn't go right. The combines interviews, like, I don't have access to that information. All I have access to is the All-22. And based on the All-22 that I watch, it was consistent with the second-round pick. Now, like Perion Winfrey, right? Perion Winfrey was a prospect that I famously loved on this channel. He did not work out. He fell to the 4th round. I thought he was a second-round pick. But the reason he fell to the 4th round was because he had locker room issues and off-the-field issues. And that ended up writing his story. Now, obviously, Shedeur has not done anything off the field to the extent of Perion Winfrey, or even in the locker room, right, in his NFL career. But I don't know how that process went with Shedeur. It seems obvious to me that the fall from the first round to the second round in day 2, that was about football. That was about his tape. That was people making the determination that I'm not comfortable taking this guy in the first round. I don't think he's going to be whatever they think a first-round pick should be at the quarterback position, right? That was about football. Him falling from day 2 to day 3, that had to do with whatever went down in the draft process, right? But what happened was once Shedeur fell from the day 2 to day 3 specifically, right, there were a couple of things that happened that made this less of a football story and more of a human interest story. One, he got prank called, right? So to a lot of people, it felt like a humiliation ritual, which brings up some very intense feelings about how black quarterbacks are treated in the NFL. So that was one thing that went down. The second thing that went down was that he fell out of the second day completely. So once he fell out the second day completely, this conversation got out the hands of people who followed the draft process and got into the hands of Good Morning America, right? And morning shows that your mom watches, you know what I mean? Or your friend that's not into sports, stuff that they watch, right? Once that story got to those folks, what they saw, because they're not in the process, they're not listening to me and JP talk about breaking down the Browns draft. They're not doing that stuff, right? They're just looking at Mel Kiper's board because Mel Kiper's the biggest mainstream board, and Mel Kiper had him at 2. So what they're seeing from their perspective is the guy who was number 2 on this board falls all the way to pick 144 and gets humiliated with a prank call along the way with a number that only NFL personnel had access to. I can see how if you're looking at it from that perspective, it can feel like a setup. If we're looking at it from like the hardcore, like people who are following the draft perspective, it's less of a mystery because we're really just talking about a guy who dropped from day 2 to day 3. That happens all the time. Garrett Nussmeier dropped from day 2 to day 3, right? This happens. Perion Winfrey dropped from day 2 to day 3, right? This happens. But to the most of the people who are interacting with this story, which are not diehard sports fans or diehard NFL draft heads, it's now just general people. The version of the story that they're getting isn't, hey, Shedeur fell from day 2 to day 3, which is what, if you're a diehard draft nut, it's what you were hearing for the most part. It was Shedeur fell from pick 2 to 144. And that's where all the craziness happens, right? So, yeah, I think Kiper played a role in this because he is the biggest mainstream source. And if he hadn't had Shedeur ranked so high in his board, which was abnormal to other boards, right? Most boards had Shedeur around player 20, 25. Mel had him like in the top 5, right? But because it's Mel Kiper, people think that is the industry standard. And the story isn't he fell from pick 25 to 144, which happens. It's he fell from pick 2 to 144, which paints a more sensationalized picture. You add in how people feel about how black quarterbacks have historically been treated in the NFL. You add in how he got prank called in the middle of this whole thing. You add in the fact that this is Deion Sanders' son, and Deion's fan base tends to think that Deion is consistently being persecuted by more powerful forces than Deion, right? Whether it be college football in general or the NFL, and you get to where we are with that story. So no, I don't think he fell to the 5th round just because he was a 5th round talent, in short. I think he fell to the 5th round because something outside of the football made people uncomfortable with him, whether it was his workout, whether it was his interviews. Something made people uncomfortable to the point to where they pushed him on the side. And that happens. It just happened to Garrett Nussmeier, where his back was the reason why he fell all the way to the 7th. He was projected to be a 2nd round pick. But yeah, if you want to figure out. But those are my thoughts on why he fell and why it became a big story. Ultimately, somebody's going to write a book about it one day, and I will buy that book because that book is going to be fascinating because this has been a fascinating thing to live through, right? Maybe I should start writing that book. PrizePicks is America's #1 sports app. The app is really easy to use for player picks. Just pick more or less for a few player stats and lock in your lineup. That's it. Rather just pick teams. Well, PrizePicks has that now too. Just pick the winner, spread, or total in any game or fight. PrizePicks is available in most states, including California, Texas, and Florida. Plus, you can even follow me on the app at Quinn_C and tell my picks with one click and follow your friends too. Speaking of my picks, here they are. Myles Garrett over 15.75 sacks. 16's been his baseline the last few years. I'd be very surprised if he goes to LA and that number drops, given that he's going to see more passing attempts, given that LA's offense is better than what the Browns have been. Quincy Judkins, 924 yards. They had 2 really good picks for Quincy here, 6 touchdowns or 924 yards. I feel comfortable taking more on both, but 1,000 yards feels like a safer bet for Quincy. I think he's going to have a big year this year. Carson Schlesinger, 2.25 sacks. I'm saying more. Remember, Mike Rutenberg likes to blitz his linebackers a lot more than the previous defensive coordinator the Cleveland Browns had. Also, Carson Schlesinger is probably going to have to get involved as a sack producer to make up for the hole that they're going to have to make up for Myles Garrett. And then Shedeur Sanders starting more than 7.5 games. I think he'll be the starter, play about 8 games or more this year. But that's my picks for this season. Best of all, play your first $5 and get $150 in lineups if you win. Just use the promo code HMA when you sign up. Again, that's your first $5 and get $150 in lineups if you win when you use the promo code HMA. PrizePicks has switched up their offer. There's no better time to join, lock in, and win that first lineup. Zane Train says this. Watch the Texas A&M tape. Concepcion never had a drop problem. He had a problem with his quarterback ball placement. He was the main reason Texas A&M almost went undefeated last season. Here's an interesting trajectory I saw during the draft season. I saw people raising the stock of Casey Concepcion at the same time dropping the stock of Marcel Reed. I wonder how that happens, right? How does Casey Concepcion's stock go up and Marcel Reed's stock go down simultaneously? It's because the people making the evaluations determined that Casey Concepcion was a victim of horrific quarterback play. We'll see if that's a big change, right? The Browns quarterback play projects to be close to the bottom of the NFL this year, but if it just being NFL quality quarterback play, or at least close to NFL quality quarterback play, we're hoping, changes all of that. But yeah, I think people have made a solid point that Casey Concepcion's drop problems were less about him not being able to catch and more about him being in difficult positions to catch footballs, which happens to a lot of wide receivers, right? Lieutenant Dan with the next question. Next hot take, he was talking about Stephen A. Smith's interview of Jarrett Verse. He said, I wasn't a fan of the questions by Stephen A., but Jarrett's answers were everything you wanted to hear from the perspective of a Browns fan. I love his attitude, and I think it will help lift the whole defense, something Miles didn't really have, at least not like that. I'm going to push back on the idea that like Miles didn't help lift the whole defense. I think Miles existing lifted the defense. The fact that they knew that they had the best player on the defensive side of football lifted the defense, and we saw tangible evidence of this. But I think Jarrett Verse can lift the defense in a very different way, right? Where it's more of a verbal thing than it was for Myles Garrett. I don't think one is really better than the other, but I think both are there. As far as Stephen A.'s questions for Jarrett Verse, this is something I noted during the interview. Stephen A. was asking Jarrett Verse questions like he was an analyst and not asking him questions like he was an active player, right? And like Stephen A. knows the difference between how you should ask questions. Because like, let's say I had an active player on the show. I don't try to bring on active players onto this show. One, because I feel like trying to cultivate those relationships to be able to get active players on here kind of compromises me a bit, to be honest about the team. And two, I don't think that active players provide very good context or value from a content perspective, because you can't really ask them what you want to ask them. Right? They are incentivized not to answer those questions honestly, or to answer those questions as blandly as possible. I think those interviews are more fun to have during the offseason. I think they're more fun to have with prospects. I might do that when I'm at East West or Senior Bowl this year, talk to them as prospects. But when you're talking to them during the season, it's not very fun. And I think Stephen A. made the mistake of asking him analyst questions when with Jarrett Verse, you kind of have to ask him more intro, like get to know Jarrett Verse more as a person and ask him questions about, what's his favorite way to rip at an offensive lineman, or, what's going on with his background. Like, I think it's easier and better to do those interviews from like a human interest standpoint than like try to get actual information. Is from Tracy, who says, what do the Browns do with Watson if Sanders and Gabriel keep outperforming him in camp than the preseason? Do they bury him on the depth chart? I see no reason why not. With Deshaun, he can be the emergency third string quarterback. I don't think that would be something that they would be opposed to doing if the play got to that point with Deshaun Watson. I don't know if it's going to get to that point because, like, I have my concerns about if, like, if Sanders and Gabriel are capable of, like, getting him to QB3 at this point. But, yeah, I think if they keep outperforming him in camp, he's got to be on the roster. So he's going to be on the 53. He'll just be the emergency third-string quarterback, and that's kind of how they would do it. All right, the next one comes from Club Sandwich Guy, who says this: although I'm not a fan of the lack of live tackling, nothing bothers me more than QBs doing scramble drills and holding the ball too long during 7-on-7s or mini camp. It improves absolutely nothing but build bad habits. Add that to the fact that we already have two quarterbacks who very obviously need to work on in-structure plays. Should be kind of as automatic dead ball sacks at this point. I have this opinion, and I'm finding out a lot of coaches in the NFL also have this opinion. When it comes to 7-on-7s, like there's one coach who I think the coach out there in Miami who doesn't even do 7-on-7s because he feels like it trains people to play football differently than what you would in 11-on-11s. And yeah, that's my thing. I think people play too much 7-on-7s, right? And it's not just like the practice. It's also like kids coming up in the high school circuit. Like a lot of them are doing 7-on-7 circuits. I think there's just way too much 7-on-7 being played. And I think it shows when you see wide receiver routes, like how wide receivers are running these routes. This shit you only do in 7-on-7s, right? All the cuts and stuff. That sounded crazy. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that. That was an unhinged moment. I know it sounded like it was unhinged, but it's all the little cut, look, all that wiggle and shit. That's 7-on-7 football right there for you, right? It's too many 7-on-7s and too many 1-on-1 drills that these young players are playing, because that stuff is useful to win those kind of moments. But if we're talking about being on time, we're talking about playing football, getting through structure. 7-on-7s, I don't know if they really serve much use. I get why they exist, because you have to have a way of working these guys when the offensive line can't work and it can't all be 11-on-11s. I get it to a point, but yeah, I think if you're gonna run 7s, you got to be aware that you're running 7s and like really, really structure it in a way to where you put limitations on it, because allowing your quarterbacks to run around all day on 7-on-7s is nuts, right? To your point about the lack of live tackling, yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of that. I get it's a physical camp. They don't want more injuries, but like, I think at some point you have to get used to live tackling, and it can't be during the preseason where you're getting this done, right? Because I feel like that could lead to more injuries. We'll see. I'm not a big fan of it, but, I'm sure if Todd sees evidence that it's not a good idea, he'll change his mind. Phil is not a bot says, I thought Monken was already on the record about there be no tackling to the ground in his practices. That said, he pushed these to do pretty hard. I have no problem with that. We'll see. We'll see, right? Like, because if they come out and they're missing a lot of tackles early on defense, then we're going to be pretty pissed that they weren't tackling to the ground during practice. So we'll see. We'll see. That's a firm wait and see for me. I'm not going to say it's a bad thing. It's possible that it's fine. But I'm also not going to hand wave it away as not a problem potentially, because like I think there's a potential for it being a problem there. But that's it for hot takes, not Q&A. Q&A was a different thing. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Pete.